Hi guys. So to continue where we left off yesterday, the dog ran upstairs, hysterically yelping to each door. At last, realizing, as the house realized, that only silence was here. It sniffed the air and scratched the kitchen door. Behind the door, the stove was making pancakes, which filled the house with a rich odor and the scent of a maple syrup. The dog frothed at the mouth, lying at the door, sniffing, its eyes turned to fire. It ran wildly in circles, biting at its tail, spun in a frenzy, and died. It lay in the parlor for an hour. 2 o'clock, sang a voice. Delicately sensing decay at last, the regiments of mice hummed out as softly as blown gray leaves in an electrical wind. 2:15, the dog was gone. In the cellar, the incinerator glowed suddenly, and a whirl of sparks leaped up the chimney. 2:35, bridge table sprouted from the patio walls. All right, so I looked at this and I began to ask if silence was a motif. So I highlighted silence, and then I typed in motif in the story, and then I took a stab at it. I'm like, does it represent loss of human emotion? In this technological world. Then I went down and I looked at this part with the dog. And we probably gathered that the dog was dying already, one from maybe radioactive poisoning from the radiation, and the description earlier. So then I looked at this part where it said it died in a frenzy, and then I kind of looked at this part all together. And I looked at it because it tells me that this house just keeps going on. It has no care for nature. If the dog represents part of nature, the house is getting rid of it. And so I wrote, it only took 15 minutes to dispose of the dog. It came out at 2:15. It was gone by, or at 2 o'clock came out and it was gone by 2:15. And remove the presence of decay of nature from its space. So I think that Bradbury, if the dog represents nature, Bradbury is suggesting that with the advancement of technology, we are losing part of nature, losing nature, I should say. And you know what? We see that. Look at construction. Look at when trees are cut down to make buildings. Look at when open spaces and grasses and flowers are being destroyed for civilizations and progress. Then I went down to this next part down here and looked at the continuation, the 2:15, the 2:35. And the house is continuing to move on. So this imagery and repetition of the day and imagery shows how the house is moving on without regard for the loss of human life. The house and technology almost feels sinister to me. And then I looked at the word leaped too. And the word leaped made me think it's happy. As if it had won a battle with uncleanliness and disorder caused by nature. Is the house at war with nature? Bridge tables spouted from patio walls. Playing cards fluttered onto pads in a shower of pips. Martinis manifested on an oaken bench with egg salad sandwiches and music played. But the tables were silent and untouched. At 4 o'clock, the tables folded like great butterflies back through the paneled walls. 4:30, the nursery walls glowed. Animals took shape: yellow giraffes, blue lions, pink antelopes, lilac panthers cavorting in crystal substance. The walls were glass. They looked out upon color and fantasy. Hidden films clocked through the well-oiled sprockets, and the walls lived. Over this ran aluminum roaches and iron crickets, and in the hot, still air, butterflies of delicate red tissue wavered among the sharp aroma of animal spores. There was the sound like a great matted yellow hive of bees within a dark bellows, the lazy bumble of its purring lion. And there was the patter of octopi feet and a murmur of a fresh jungle rain, like other hoofs falling upon the summer-starched grass. Now the walls dissolved into distances of parched weed mile on mile and warm, endless sky. The animals drew away into thorn breaks and water holes. It was the children's hour. 5 o'clock, the bath filled with clear, hot water. So as I continued to look at this, I looked at this part where it said the tables were silent and untouched. And for me, this reinforces the imagery of lonely and emptiness. No humanity or soul. Then I went on and I looked at this part about the nursery. And first of all, a nursery back at the time wasn't necessarily for babies like we think of it now. A nursery at that time often was more like what we associate with a playroom. And at first, I looked at this and I was like, whoa, that's really cool. I like the idea of this. You have all these animals and it's peaceful and it's nature. In the kids' room. But then things like crystal substance, walls of glass, fantasy, it's fake. It's not nature. And if this is a playroom, why not get the real thing and just send the kids outside to really be outside nature? And then I went on down. And notice on this one, I did not do as many as I normally did. This was one of those ones where I probably could have put a lot more because of all the imagery in it. But I felt like I could sum up what I needed to right here. 6, 7 o'clock, the dinner dishes manipulated like magic tricks. The word manipulated. Again, that word, Bradbury's use of the word manipulated shows how he feels about technology being in control over the humans living in the house. And it's an illusion because of the words magic tricks. The dinner dish is manipulated like magic tricks, and in the study, a click. In the metal stand opposite the hearth, where a fire now blazed up warmly, a cigar popped out, half an inch of soft gray ash on it, smoking, waiting. 9 o'clock, the beds warmed, their hidden circuits, for nights were cool. 9:05, a voice spoke from the study ceiling. Mrs. McClellan, which poem would you like this evening? The house was silent. The voice said at last, since you express no preference, I shall select a poem at random. Quiet music rose to back the voice. Sarah Teasdale, as I recall your favorite. There will come soft rains, and in the smell of the ground, and swallows circling with their shimmering sound, and frogs in the pools singing at night, and wild plum trees in a tremulous white. Robins will wear their feathery fire, whistling their whims on a low fence wire. And no one will know of the war, not one will care at last when it's done. Not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly. And spring herself, when she awoke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone. So we're going to spend some time here, and mostly with the poem. And this poem is actually called There Will Come Soft Rains. And I know that because I Googled it. So the poem is called by the same title as the short story. This tells me it is super important to understand the meaning of the story. So I have to spend some time in this poem. But before that, I found it fascinating because I had read the poem and I found it fascinating that it was her favorite. And so I highlighted that because it's irony. Because it shows what became of them. And I think it foreshadows what's to come. All right, so now if I'm looking at this poem, there will come soft rains and the smell of the ground, the swallows circling with their shimmering sounds. So I'm highlighting ground and sound only because it represents the rhyming. And the reason I noted this is because it's light and fanciful. Which is a contrast to the actual meaning of the poem, which is darker. All right, so we notice again nature, robins, frogs, swallows. And because it's coupled with No One Will Know the War, and this was written in the early 1900s, so we might be talking about, she might have been referencing the Civil War, or she could even have been referencing the tension that was starting from the World Wars, the First World War. So then I looked at that, and no one will know of the war, not one, or care. And mankind perished utterly. So this suggests nature doesn't care that mankind will perish. And nature will outlive man. And then spring herself. So spring, new beginning. And dawn, again, a new beginning. So they're symbolic. Would scarcely know that we were gone. Seems to imply that nature will reclaim what humans take from them, and it will survive. Nature will survive, even if we destroy ourselves through war or whatever, or through nature even. And this really made me think of this path of going through this hurricane season where Irma and Harvey have devastated areas and wiped out and destroyed places, or Katrina, or the earthquake in Mexico. So nature waging its war on mankind. So we'll stop here for this session, and we will pick up again on page 7 in the next session.